Hey, deserving listeners, it's that time of week where I look at your comments from my videos last week and I react to your comments. So let's get to it. Colt and Larissa video, Vegan said, the part about self-soothing because no one soothed you when you needed it most really hit home. Yeah. In order to self-soothe, we first have to be soothed by people outside of us. And through that repetitive process, we learn to soothe ourselves. There's a bit of a myth around parenting kids that if you soothe your kid too much, then it makes them dependent on you and then they can't soothe for themselves. And certainly that is something to think about some of the times if you're always inserting yourself into their emotional life and invading them, or you're too anxious about them having a little bit of a speed bump here and there and you're always stepping in to try to eliminate that challenge that they can learn from. But generally speaking, 99% of the time, when your child is distressed, particularly when they're very young, when you soothe them, it helps them obviously in the moment, but also helps them to learn how to soothe themselves over time. There are a number of ways of looking at this. One is that they internalize you soothing them into their own psyche. Some of you might actually be able to relate to this, where you have a mentor or a teacher or a therapist or even a YouTuber, and you listen to that person enough, and then you hear their voice in your mind as you are living your life. You're about to do something, and you hear that person as if they were with you, not an hallucination, but as if they were there telling you advice or telling you how to, giving you some guidance. And that's another way of looking at when you help a child repetitively over time, they carry that with them, and they're in the 5th grade, they're alone, they're at school, and they're in stress, and they recall your voice telling them that everything's going to be okay, or that they're a good person or something like that, and that helps them to soothe themselves. The other way of looking at it is that as you lower the distress for a child, they just generally are able to think straight. And when children are able to think straight, they're able to problem solve much better. And if they're able to problem solve much better, then they have a lot more confidence as they head into other distressing situations, if that makes sense. All right. Queen says, on the subject of Colt, his behavior seems clearly performative. He seems like he's managing the public perception of him at all times. He needs to be the calm one who is somehow surrounded by chaotic women so he can look like a good guy. End of comment. Yeah, it's hard to say what's going on in Colt's mind, and I certainly will point out performative behavior when it looks performative to me. We can never know because we would have to be inside that person's head, and we aren't. But the observation that it might seem performative is a viable hypothesis. And why would someone be that way? Well, I don't know. If I was on a show, I'd probably be performative a little bit too. It's terrifying to be on a reality TV show in a situation where someone is yelling at you, or let me just broaden it out. You're on a reality TV show, and it's just so interesting to think about what would go through someone's mind before they went on it. Do they think things are going to work out well and they're going to look like a hero? Do they think they're going to look studly? Do they think that they actually want to bring up drama because that drives up Instagram followers? It's just interesting to think about. Or is it just like they're unaware of what reality TV is, or there's a little bit of money involved from what I understand. So, I don't know. But imagine you're on a show like that and someone's yelling at you, or you're in conflict. It seems reasonable to worry about how you're coming across to the entire world, because people can literally get death threats if they're considered to be a bad guy in one of these shows. And so, but there's that. But I did often point out how Colt would often step out of conflict and would come across as if he's very calm. And then he would point out how everyone is crazy and all that kind of stuff, instead of also taking responsibility for his issues. I have a high suspicion that Colt went through a lot as a child and has been going through a lot as an adult as well. And so if I knew him as a client, I'm sure that I would have a compassionate conceptualization of what resulted in his behavior, whether it's performative or not. Yeah, that scene where he's drinking the alcohol seemed a little interesting in that way. But again, it's hard to know. It's hard to know what's going on. You know, I could see another situation where Colt is just so insecure that he feels like he can't really be himself. He can't really be spontaneous. It was pretty rare to see any spontaneity from him. And this is actually part of schema therapy, or at least my angle of it, in that when you're young and you have spontaneous feelings and thoughts and impulses, we learn over time that some spontaneity is okay, but not all of our spontaneity. Like a spontaneous laugh when you're enjoying a good time with your friends or your family, that's okay. But a spontaneous, wanting to throw a rock at your younger sister, that's not okay. And so you learn over time that some things are okay to be spontaneous with and some things are not. So you learn how to control that. And if everything goes well enough, then you have self-control most of the time and you're spontaneous when it's appropriate. And if you go through difficult times as a young person, then you learn you can't be spontaneous. You can't be. You learn that to be spontaneous means that you're going to get abused or neglected or something bad will happen. And so instead of turning off just some of your spontaneity, kids end up just turning off all their spontaneity because it's just like, it's just better off if I'm just never spontaneous. If it's better off if I'm constantly uptight. And of course, that would really not get your needs met, right? And so I wonder if Colt has a bit of that as well. Hard to say. He's on a reality TV show. It's hard to know. But I rarely saw any spontaneity from him. But I don't know. Brandon and Julia episode that we posted last week, Suzanne says, I think Dr. Honda is right. Well, Suzanne, I already like you. Suzanne says, I think Dr. Honda is right. Brandon's kind of a ghost, and he seems to take on whatever form works for him to get by in any situation, but he never really expresses himself. That's why Julia thinks she's in a relationship with the form he presented to her, but she isn't. And maybe his parents think that they are totally dealing with an adult child who was happy to be infantilized. End of comment. Yeah, absolutely. That seems to be what's happening. It's hard to know, but it seems to be that because Brandon doesn't exhibit a self, we don't know if he has a self, but he doesn't seem to be exhibiting a self, which points to the possibility that he isn't in connection with himself on the inside, then he comes across as if he's very agreeable. And to Julia, she would rationally believe that Brandon is completely on her side. And to the parents, they would rationally believe that Brandon was also on their side for the most part. And both are right and both are wrong because it's possible that Brandon isn't on anyone's side because he has never been given a chance to develop a sense of who he is and what he wants. And without knowing who you are and what you want, then you're just drifting through life like a leaf in the wind. And that makes me sad to think about if that's true for him and for everyone around him because it can be very frustrating to be with someone like that. KP says, I'm convinced 75% of these people on 90 Day Fiancé would phrase things in a better and gentler way if they were speaking in their native tongue. Yes, absolutely, KP. It's something that we need to think about when we are evaluating the statements of some of the people on these shows when they're not speaking their native language for sure. Karina says, my parents treat Julia, the parents, Karina says, the parents treat Julia as a guest when it comes to the bedroom situation and their rules, but treat her as an indentured servant or at best a long-term member of the family when it comes to pitching in around the farm. So which is it? Yeah, it is interesting along those lines. A lot of people commented on that. Alicia says, and it just hit me. I was Julia in my last relationship. I feel very seen. Guess I'll bring that up with my therapist next month. Yeah, absolutely. A lot of you will comment all around things like this of like, oh, I now realize my past relationship was very similar to this, and this is what it looks like from the outside. Kate says, today listening, I had a lump in my throat. Oh, so today as I was watching your video, I had a lump in my throat as I could relate and realized my traumas growing up with a depressed sibling and the effect it had on the entire family. My dog is barking. My mother also had episodes of depression that in my young mind I didn't understand. Right. Yeah, I'm guessing that that happens too as you're watching these videos and I'm commenting on things, or you're just watching the TV show 90 Day Fiancé, that it gives us a chance to reflect on our own childhoods and gives us a chance to see what the effects can be of that. And so I think I was talking in that video about how if you're raised in a family where you have a depressed parent or a depressed sibling, or you are in a situation where people are, they love you, your family loves you, but they're not really emotionally available for you, then that can cause this ongoing pain that you feel. But it's confusing because as a child and as an adult looking back on your childhood, it might look as though you had a perfect childhood. A lot of people will say that in situations like that. When you're raised in a family where there wasn't any abuse and there wasn't any violence or drug addiction, but you had a parent who, for whatever reason, was distracted or suffering or something, maybe even one of your parents had ongoing cancer treatment or something, it's impossible for a parent to be completely attuned to their children that whole time, and the children likely suffer unless there's a village mentality around raising that child, which there often is not in our modern society, which is not a good thing. And then as a child, you feel like, well, my family is great. And then as an adult, you look back and you think, yeah, my family was great. But the entire time there was this low-grade emotional neglect happening that can have a huge effect on our development and on our issues and on the things we need to talk with our therapist about. Patrick said, your explanation of recreating our past makes a ton of sense. People raised in trauma seem to find it over and over again throughout life in the hopes that they can recreate the situation with an improved outcome. Yeah, I talk about this a lot over the 12 years of doing this podcast. I've been talking about projective identification and reenactments and all the other kinds of concepts that relate to this. But the idea is that it seems as though under observation, repetition compulsion, another thing that Freud talked about, it seems as though under observation, humans, when we observe humans, we see that whatever sort of difficulty relationally you went through as a child, we tend to seek as an adult, which doesn't make any sense logically. If you were abused by a very critical mother as a child, and then as an adult you seek out critical women, it would seem like, why would you do that? You know what it's like to live with a critical person in your life as a child. Why would you want to be with a critical person as an adult? But of course, it's a subconscious thing, and there's a lot of reasons for this conceptually. One of which is that we're, as you're saying, Patrick, we're trying to recreate it subconsciously, and we're hoping it's going to go differently this time, because in that we can say, okay, I can put that to rest because I managed to turn it around. I found someone that was kind of critical of me, and I pushed back on them, and they learned to apologize, or they learned that they were wrong. And so I prevailed this time. But that rarely happens. One, because if you find a very critical person, it's really hard to get them to change because they usually have traumas that they're coming from. And two, when you fight with someone, they tend to fight back with more criticism, right? Three, it's often an unconscious process, and so we're not really aware of why we're doing what we're doing. And what it ends up turning into is, I hate this person because they're critical. Why do I always pick critical people to be with? What's wrong with me? And now you're criticizing the self, because that's really what's happening, is that, like I was saying earlier, we internalize whatever's happening to us, our caregivers. And so you have someone that's criticizing us when we're young. We internalize that voice and we criticize ourselves. We hear those voices in our minds. And as one of the reasons why we recreate these is because we're trying to distract ourselves from the fact that we're so critical of ourselves. If we find someone on the outside that's critical of us, then we're distracted from the fact that actually we're the ones that are critical, not only of ourselves, but also of other people. And the only reason why I'm criticizing my spouse is because they're so critical of me. This is the nature of projective identification. You can listen to all my other episodes on that. You can go to the website and go to the episode list and just do a search for projective identification. You can hear more about that. Brandon and Julia, another video here. Tasha says, I feel like it really isn't fair of the parents to give Julia what looks to be a storage room with a bed. How is she supposed to stretch out and feel at home here when there are boxes and junk all over her floor? Where is she supposed to put her belongings? End of comment. Yeah, a lot of people commented on that. When I saw that originally, it just felt par for the course because they had been treating her questionably up until that point anyway. And yeah, I didn't comment on it because it seemed like it was par for the course in terms of how she's been treated. I was thinking, oh, of course they give her a crappy room with a bunch of crap in it. Mitchie says, people online have been talking about their animal keeping style. The dogs being in kennels, the kitchen coop being way too small, the limping pig, and the small enclosure for the iguanas. They have a whole farm and still give their animals so little space. Inez says, they're bad animal stewards from what has been shown, and these dogs are in kennels, and these dogs that are in kennels are kept for breeding. It's a puppy mill style. I also wonder about that chicken coop. Why does Julia's room look like a clutter storage room with a bed? On that big farm, they don't have a place where they can put all that stuff instead of her room? Yeah. Cultivate says, people with actual farms do not expect visitors to pitch in, especially not immediately or without the visitor showing interest. Okay, so sometimes I ask people like, hey, farm people, is this normal or not? And, tell me about the context here. And so Cultivate is saying that, people with actual farms don't expect visitors to pitch in, especially not immediately or without the visitor showing interest. Yes, it sucks getting up early to take care of animals, but to expect someone else to do it is just unethical. Julia is not a hired farmhand or an indentured servant. This quote-unquote farm strikes me as a cover for dog breeding. Interesting. Since none of their animals appear to be production animals and they don't have vegetable fields, they likely are able to list the acreage as a farm and get a tax break, but they use it to breed dogs. Interesting. I don't know about any of that stuff, but I'll take your word for it. Alexis says, hi, I am an emergency room veterinary nurse, and I'm extremely concerned about how they keep the animals. There are red flags everywhere. End of comment. Yeah, so I was asking that too. I was saying, I'm concerned about those dogs. Is there some, I don't know, is that normal to see the dogs? Now, some people were commenting and saying, well, maybe they have the dogs in those kennels because they know that the dogs are going to get real aggressive with Julia or something. But I don't know. And again, there's no way to know at this point watching the show, but certainly there's some speculations, and certainly maybe someone should be looking into it. Maybe there already is. Andrew and Amira, the video that we watched here, Andrew and Amira, the couple. Leanne says, I'm going to live my life in a way that I never give someone cult vibes. Right, so in that video, I was like, I'm getting cult vibes from Andrew. Even before I heard about Amira talking about how Andrew was seemingly being very coercive to her, just the way he was coming across, he seemed kind of like he had some cult vibes. But of course, I had no idea yet. And we still don't know, actually. Although I'm recording this before episode 4 comes out, or 5. Anyway, Sam says, yeah, he does have a slight cult vibe. Hopefully it doesn't escalate. Yeah, hopefully. Leslie says, I grew up in a home daycare too. My mom is a provider to this day. It's not easy having your home double as a business center. Agreed, Leslie. You and I can bond on that. German says, I feel like I need to back up a fellow woman who doesn't want kids, Team Amira. Right. Some people don't want to have kids, and there's nothing wrong with that. Some women don't want to have kids. Nothing wrong with that. We really just need to grow up about that issue. It's just like, it's a decision that you make, and it's fine. Some people want to have kids, some people don't. Let it go. Stephanie and Ryan video, the very first one, so some comments there. Alyssa says, I grew up with a bipolar dad who wasn't properly diagnosed. Okay, I grew up with a bipolar dad who was not diagnosed. It's definitely not his fault, but it is very hard to navigate someone else's moods, especially as a child. I really hope she goes to therapy. It helped me a lot. All right, so Alyssa is talking about how Stephanie grew up with a bipolar father. and how difficult it was for her. In that episode, I talked about having if you have bipolar, it doesn't mean you're a terrible parent, but it does mean that it can, create some challenges, particularly if you're undiagnosed or you're not treated effectively or you don't have access to treatment, that kind of thing. Jordan says, not everyone in Michigan sounds... Okay, so I actually asked in this video, I was like, Stephanie's accent, is that typical to Michigan? Because it sounds kind of typical, but it also sounds a little off. I know people from that neck of the woods, and they don't sound like that, but they sound kind of like that. So I asked people from that area, is this a typical Michigan accent, Grand Rapids accent? And Jordan says, not everyone in Michigan sounds like that, but that's definitely a Michigan accent. Interesting. So a region of Michigan sounds like Stephanie. It's pretty distinct. Elise says, I'm not from Michigan. I'm a Canadian who lives just across the border. That, to my ears, is a very typical Michigan accent. Interesting. By the way, some people were commenting about my use of the word Canada. Yes, I know the country just a few, it's not that far. It borders, my state borders on Canada. I know how to pronounce Canada. I call it Canada because it's just an inside joke with my Canadian friends. I don't know what to say. That people would think I didn't know how to pronounce Canada. Sweetie says, sometimes you have to go through a lot of duds before you find the right one, quote unquote. Taking notes for my vows next year. Okay, so Sweetie is, I guess I said, I don't remember saying this, but it sounds like something I would say. Sometimes you have to go through a lot of duds before you meet the right one. And Sweetie is like, oh, I'm going to use that for my vows in my wedding next year. Or maybe your speech that you give at the reception. As Dr. Kirk Honda always says, sometimes you have to go through a lot of duds before you find the right one. Well, I went through a lot of duds, and I found the right one. Stephanie and Ryan, video number 2, Dane says, I've noticed a lot of older women tend to be more attracted to much younger foreign men. Is there a psychological reason for this? It also seems like because the men are so much younger, there's a lot of conflict with jealousy and mistrust, as these women always assume they're out with other women. In this couple's case, Stephanie and Ryan, the woman is 52 and the man is in his 20s. Does the age difference play a role in her constant state of fear and jealousy? Would she be as paranoid if the man was her age, or is it case by case? End of comment. Yeah, interesting observation or opinion. Dane, so your first idea here is you've noticed a lot of older women tend to be more attracted to much younger foreign men. Well, on this show, yeah, because to get on this show, one, you have to be with a foreign person from the United States. And two, you're more likely to go on, I'm guessing, if there's some kind of detail that makes it more interesting to the viewers. I'm guessing there are plenty of couples that are that apply to be on the show who are very normal, just same age, everything works out, they don't have any conflict, and they're not asked to be on the show. We have to understand that reality TV is meant to entertain, not to be a document of human life. Or a typical document of typical human life. So having said that, 90 Day Fiancé and the other reality TV shows that I watch eventually do present us with very commonplace issues of trauma and conflict and attachment injury and all that kind of stuff that I can talk about. But anyway, so I don't know if I'd have to look up the research, but I suspect that this isn't true, just based on what I understand the research is and also an anecdote. That older women, meaning women in their 40s and 50s, have all sorts of attractions. And I'm guessing that younger foreign men it's a pretty rare event. Again, on this show, it happens a lot. But you ask, is there a psychological reason for this? I don't know. I could speculate. Like with Darcy and with Stacy, they both have a track record of dating men from particularly Eastern Europe. And what is that? And younger men. And what is that? I don't know. I mean, we could speculate, and I think there'd be some pretty easy speculations that I don't need to mention. But it's hard to say. Sometimes we like things because we like them. Also, we don't have to pathologize it, right? If you're attracted to someone of the same gender, we don't have to pathologize that. You're just attracted to someone of the same gender. If you're attracted to people who are short, we don't have to pathologize that. If you're attracted to people who are very bubbly or something, or very extroverted, we don't have to pathologize that. It's just a preference, right? And for some people, they might prefer men from a particular region of the world, and they like them younger. We don't have to pathologize it. We don't have to go like, I wonder what's going on there. It's just a preference. We tend to look for psychological reasons of things that we consider to be pathology, and so we just have to pump the brakes a little bit on that. You also say here that it also seems like because the men are much younger, there's a lot of conflict and jealousy and mistrust, as the women always assume that the younger foreign man is out with other women. But they often are. That's the thing about this show, is that infidelity and cheating is the rule rather than the exception. And so, for example, with Stephanie, she has apparently, according to her stories, a lot of reasons to suspect Ryan is out doing things. So, but the larger question of, if you were an older person dating a younger person, would that increase your chance of feeling jealousy or your paranoia about that person? Unjustified worries, would it increase that? I don't know. It's an interesting question. I could see that. I could see that happening. I could also see it not happening. But, it's an interesting question, Dane. You bring up a lot of interesting questions. Zoe says, I had no idea what her big secret could have been. So in the show, she's saying, I have this secret I have to tell Ryan about. And Zoe's saying, I had no idea what her big secret could have been. And when she made the big reveal that she had slept with Ryan's cousin, I was shocked, horrified, and absolutely delighted all at the same time. Sometimes I feel guilty about loving some of the drama of a reality TV show. Does it make me a bad person? So this is an interesting question. I'm getting some interesting questions here, Zoe. So you're saying that as you're watching and I wonder what that big secret. Oh, the big secret is that she cheated on her boyfriend, her fiance, I believe, with his cousin. And we could say it wasn't really cheating because they had broken up, apparently, but who knows. And you say, Zoe, that you were shocked and horrified, like, oh no, you did what? And then also absolutely delighted that you love the drama. Does that make you a bad person? Well, I don't know what a bad person is. I suspect that if we could define that, I'm guessing this does not qualify for a bad person, especially considering I think it's the majority of people who watch this show get at least some delight from moments like that. So it's an interesting question. Why would we get delight from watching drama on a reality TV show? It's an interesting question. And I've mulled it over. Before y'all asked me to watch reality TV about a year ago when the pandemic started in April, because I didn't watch reality TV until then. And I didn't really have much opinion about it because I just didn't watch it. But as I'm watching it, I'm realizing I'm seeing what it really is like. Because when you don't watch reality TV and you just sort of see it in the background, it looks kind of weird. It just looks like, I don't really understand what's happening. After watching it, I totally understand. I understand the appeal. I understand what's going on. Me and my wife now casually watch reality TV sometimes. And so I get it. And why is it? So I've, in this short amount of time, I've been, occasionally thinking, why do we like this? And maybe comment below, because I'm curious about what you think. Of course, to be shocked and horrified sometimes, it makes sense. But why do we delight? Why would some of us delight in what's happening? Well, the common conceptualization of this is that When we see other people suffer, then we feel better about ourselves. When we see other people, failing in life, then by contrast, we're succeeding because at least we're not failing like them. If we see other people screwing up relationships, then our relationships look suddenly a lot better. If other people are falling apart, also we are distracted from our own lives. There's also, I think, a little bit of what Freud would talk. I won't go into the weeds on that, but we seem to have a dark side to our personalities around the world in every culture. We tend to have a part of ourselves that is geared towards destruction, towards hurting other people. We see a lot of examples of that. The analogy that I usually think about is when you have a toddler and you're playing with the toddler and you're putting blocks up, you're stacking them up. You can see the toddler, oh, I can stack these blocks. And then there's always that point where the toddler just goes, yay, boom, and just wants to, annihilate the whole thing, and everything goes falling down. Or they're in the high chair and they're eating some food, and they just want to fling the food all over the place. We seem to want to do that. Now, why would we want to do that? Well, power. When we feel powerless, it feels good to have power in the world, right? To exert your power, to show that to say, do I have power? Oh, yes, I have power. And we do this through various different ways, some pathological, some functional. And perhaps when we watch these shows, it's some kind of power that we feel, some kind of control we have in our own lives of watching destruction in general. So those are some other ideas. But you tell me in the comments below if you get delight from watching the bad moments and why you watch it. Of course, other reasons why we watch this show are that I think because of our traumas, we are actually watching this show instead of recreating. I was talking about earlier about how we recreate our traumas. Instead of recreating them, we can watch them and actually maybe get the same amount of benefit or even a better benefit because we're actually not being, personally impacted by it. So let's say you had a cult in your life when you were young. Maybe you had a dad or a mom that was like a cult. You had a spouse that was like cult. And you watch the show, and as you're watching cult, you're getting really worked up. And you're working through a lot of feelings. And you're like, yes, he is a jerk face, and there's nothing you can do in the face of such a jerk face. There's nothing you can do. That he's so stubborn, and in the back of your mind, subconsciously or consciously, you're thinking to yourself, yeah, there was nothing I could have done. That was not it felt like it was my fault. But watching it on the screen, I now realize, no, it wasn't my fault. It's that person's fault. There's something wrong with that person. There was something wrong with the person in my past too. Or we want to see our past spouse or one of our caregivers tortured on the television screen, which a lot of these shows actually seem to exhibit. A lot of these people are clearly suffering before our eyes, and we might get a little bit of revenge pleasure from watching someone from our past get tortured. We project that person onto the screen, and through that person, we get some vicarious pleasure from watching that person suffer. Those are other reasons. I could hypothesize about others. Jovi and Yara, good old Jovi and Yara are turning into the Colt and Larissa of this season. Holly says, oh boy, this is getting intense. We got 4 yikes. Oh, so I must have said yikes 4 times. Proxima says, aha, my grandparents were alcoholics, and when it was drinking time, they would get very snappy and would have to rush home if they were out. It is possible he is an alcoholic. Right. So in that episode, it suddenly occurred to me that he might, of course, we have no idea of knowing, we'd have to ask him, that he might suffer from alcohol dependence and he needs to drink throughout the day. And because he's on film and because they were driving to the furniture store, he couldn't drink, or he chose not to drink. And his tension was building and building and building, and that's what caused the bad mood. That's what caused him to say, "I just want to go in and out. I want to get back home." That's what caused him to be very mean to Yara. And we see as soon as he gets home, boom, he's got a beer, and then he calms down. We don't know, but it's a speculation. Stephanie says, "He gives me the same vibe as my uncle when he is off cigarettes." So when people go off cigarettes, they'll have similar irritability for sure. Vanessa says, "Yes, I think he has been moody because of his lack of alcohol drinking." Jasmina says, "Dr. Kirk must be going for a walk or hugging his pets after every episode," watching Jovi and Yara. "He is telling us frequently how these episodes sometimes trigger him, and I think this couple seems, again, as a trigger to him." Yeah, no, I mean, I was sort of exaggerating that Jovi and Yara are the new Colt and Larissa. No one, I think, triggered me as much as Colt and Larissa, or as much as they do trigger me. So Jovi and Yara aren't even anywhere close to that for me. We all have our own personal traumas that we're working through, I suppose, our own sensitivities as a result, and thus each couple will trigger different things. And so for me, it's Colt and Larissa. For someone else, it could be Jovi and Yara. For another person watching, it could be someone else. Let me know in the comments. I'm curious on that too. Who is the most triggering couple? And try to pick a couple that I've watched, because I'm curious. Of course, there are many other couples that are triggering, and maybe one day I'll get to those couples. I've heard that is it Allison or something? Who are the other people that I have a list here of all the people? Let's see, Chantel and Pedro, Angela and Michael, Asuelu and Kalani, Muhammad and Danielle, among others. Anyway. Do those people trigger you? Usually people ask me to do reaction videos to the most triggering of couples. But yeah, Jasmina, I'm, other than the Colt and Larissa videos, these videos don't trigger me really. I mean, maybe they will later on in the season. And when they do, I'll talk about it, because I want to model that it's okay to be triggered, and that sometimes we're triggered, and we need to acknowledge that and do things to help us to not be distressed. Like, as you say, hug your pets or go for a walk or hug your wife, that kind of thing. Sarah says, "I think Yara is so unhappy that she tries to make up for those bad and unpleasant feelings by buying nice things to make herself feel better. I don't know if anyone can relate, but when I am having a bad day, I take a shower, do my makeup, and it gives me a temporary pick-me-up. It feels like that's what Yara is doing with this redecorating." End of comment. Yeah, it's interesting. I hadn't thought about that, but that I could absolutely see that. Of course, it's speculative, but Yara might be expressing her unhappiness through trying to redecorate, and because she seems, pretty focused on that, instead of being focused on just how much conflict these two have and seemingly incompatibility, really. Zoe says, "Joey's problem is he can't understand that the problem is how he treated her. He thinks it's all because she wanted a rug. She's not throwing a tantrum over a rug. Yara is throwing a tantrum because he is so blind as to how he's treating her. It's infuriating to try to explain to someone like Jovi how they hurt you and why. Sometimes you just get tired, give up, and go along with what they say just to have somewhat of a win." End of comment. Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack here with what Zoe is saying. That, yeah, from the looks of it, Jovi is really focusing on the rug thing. And I reacted to this, the problem was the way he was talking to her. That was the problem. There's nothing wrong with them disagreeing about a rug. There is something wrong with just openly insulting someone and being a pain in the butt. And so, yeah, but I actually do believe that Jovi did recognize that he crossed a line. That's why I think he was trying to make up for it by being nice, by being his version of nice to her later on. Hard to know, but I think he did know that he made a mistake, but he was trying to act like he didn't know because because of his insecurities. I'm guessing he doesn't want to admit. Again, total speculation. I have no idea, but it just kind of looked like that. And then you say, it's so infuriating to try to explain to someone like Jovi how hurt you are and why, and they don't listen to you, and then you just get tired and give up. Yeah, well, so in my observation, Yara didn't really tell Jovi in a functional, differentiated way what her problem was. She was really focusing on the furniture. If I was in Yara's shoes, I would have at least tried to say something like, so Jovi, I get that you didn't like the rug. And looking back, that's not really the issue for me. The issue for me is just your whole attitude and mood the entire time. Look, I get it. You didn't want to shop for a rug, but I wanted to. It's special to me, and I kind of need you to be there because I don't have any money, and you have the credit card. And so if we're going to get married and it's going to be our money, then I just wanted to find a rug that the two of us could enjoy. And the whole time you were putting me down and doing all these things, and that really hurt my feelings. So if Yara would have said that, God knows what Jovi would have said, but that would have at least given Jovi an opportunity to respond to that. But Yara never did that. She just kept saying, I can't believe that you won't let me buy things. You know, it was essentially that was what. And according to what Sarah was saying was, well, maybe that's Yara's focusing on the material things because that's how she copes with life. Again, that's a good hypothesis, hard to know. Little says, on behalf of us borderline folks out there, I'd like to officially request some Ocean of Emotion merch. After the episode, I Googled Ocean of Emotion, and of course, I think there's a band from the 70s or something called Ocean of Emotion. But yeah, it'd be a good merch thing, Ocean of Emotion. Most of our merch ideas come from y'all, so whenever you have an idea about merch, let us know. And then Stacy actually designs everything. All right, getting to a Mike and Natalie video. Sweetums says, honestly, seeking therapy solely because of the beautiful rabbit hole I fell into whilst watching one of your reaction videos. Music to my ears, Sweetums. I mean, that's your name. I'm not calling you Sweetums. That's your name on YouTube. Great. You fell into a rabbit hole whilst watching my reaction videos, and now you're seeking therapy, which is great. Make sure you shop around. Sometimes the first therapist isn't a good one. Like I said earlier, sometimes you have to shop around and go through some duds before you find a good one. Abigail says, I'm a big crier. I've been through some hardships, and it's made me extremely sensitive, so now I tear up over stuff all the time. I've always hated it. It's embarrassing. Crying isn't always received with compassion, and I've been bullied over it and called weak on more than one occasion. I'm actively working hard to accept and embrace my crying, and hearing Dr. Kirk talk about crying almost made me tear up. Can we get a pro-crying agenda t-shirt? Pro-crying agenda. Well, what would be how about pro-crying advocate? Maybe that would be the t-shirt, pro-crying. Or I'm crying, deal with it. Or just because I'm crying doesn't mean you have to do something about it. I don't know. Your idea is probably better. But yeah, we live in a very stupid society that it's like you go to a movie and something funny happens and you laugh out loud, or you're at a comedy show or you're talking with your friends and someone makes a joke. Well, clearly we've evolved to laugh. People laugh all over the world in every culture. So it's a natural response with joy or surprise or something that's humorous for us to laugh uncontrollably sometimes. And crying is the same thing. We clearly evolved to cry. Clearly, people cry in every culture. People come out of the womb literally crying. So it's as natural and human as going to the bathroom or sleeping or being thirsty. Crying is a fundamental human reaction. And to be ashamed of water coming out of your eyes because you're having an emotional reaction, and then to be shamed and bullied for it, my God, I mean, we really just have to grow up. This is another problem. And I think I might have talked about this in the episode. I have students who are training to be therapists, or they're postgrads. They're already therapists, and I'm supervising them, and something bad happened in their life or with a client, and they start crying in front of me. they'll always apologize. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm crying. And I'm like, hey, never apologize for crying. One. Two, you're a therapist. And I'm a therapist. And I've never shamed you for crying. In fact, I've always encouraged you to. Never apologize for crying. And know that you can always cry with me. It's one of the things I tell my supervisees, I tell my students, I tell my clients. Clients will apologize for crying in therapy. They'll be in therapy about, crying, and they'll be like, oh, I'm sorry for crying. I'm like, hey, if you can't cry in therapy, where can you cry? That's the purpose. There are times in my life, in my workday, where I will be with criers all day long. I'll be with some clients in the morning. All of them will cry at some point in the session. I'll talk with some supervisees. Some of them will cry. I'll go to school and I'll teach a class and the students will cry. Why? Because it's the same as laughing. It'd be the same as if I said, I had some sessions with clients and everyone giggled or laughed at some point. I had some meetings with supervisees and at some point someone laughed at some point. I taught class and at some point the students started to laugh at some dumb joke, some dumb dad joke I made. It's the same thing. But somehow when it comes to crying, it's weak or it's wrong. Now, a reason for this is because when people are crying, it's implied sometimes, particularly given people's traumas, that it's the other person's fault. If you're with your spouse and you start crying in response to something that your spouse did, your spouse in a very, very quick reactivity to that is, oh crap, I have hurt you. I've hurt my spouse. It's my fault. It's my fault that now I'm hurt. Now I'm afraid. Now I feel like my spouse might leave me. She's crying. She's going to leave me because I hurt her. So how do I get out of this? And if you've never been modeled it and you haven't gone to couples therapy, you don't know what to do. So you take a shortcut and you just say, stop crying. Don't be weak, okay? Because you're trying to eliminate the problem in this very ham-fisted way. And you rinse and repeat that enough times, especially when it was done to you when you were a kid. We do this to kids. A 5-year-old would be crying. Be like, stop crying. It always just boggles me in movies when someone will die or something horrible will happen and someone's crying, which is normal, like going to the bathroom or laughing at a joke. Someone's crying and someone's grabbing, don't cry, don't cry. I'm like, why? What is so wrong about crying? When did crying ever do anything wrong? What is the matter with crying? It'd be like if someone laughing at a joke and you grab it, don't laugh, just don't do it, don't laugh. What? You'd stop, be like, what's wrong with laughing? Why are you so threatened by my laughing? Are you that weak that you can't handle me laughing? Are you that weak that you can't handle me crying? Are you that insecure with yourself? Are you that terrified of emotion? Is emotion so threatening to you that a little tear coming out of my face because I'm having a normal human reaction for whatever reason I'm having it, and it's somehow this like massive threat to you, and you're going to bully me because of it? It's just absurd. It's absurd. And how many problems are created by this? How many years of therapy are dedicated to correcting for this? I went through a portion of my life where I shamed I absorbed culture when I was young, especially as a man, as a boy. And I would occasionally cry in grade school. And then I cried at this one moment in grade school, and I was very humiliated. And I said, I was fifth or sixth grade, and I set out to never cry again. And every time I got tears, no one taught me this. Somehow I just knew to do this from society because society is very clear about these things. Whenever I got sad, whenever I felt that urge to cry come on, I got angry. I remember like gritting my teeth. I'm in the sixth grade. I'm 11 years old or something. I'm just like, "Argh," and it worked. I effectively transitioned all my tears into anger, and I didn't cry really at all for the next 10 years. Then I became a therapist, and I was like, I need to cry more. Why do like I would be in moments where I'd be like, I should be crying right now, but I'm not. I feel very sad, but I see other people crying. What's wrong with me that I can't cry? And so I set out to unleash and get those neurons back online, and it took a while. I would be in a moment where I'd be sad. I'd be like, I think I should be crying right now. Not that I wasn't having the emotion. I was having the emotion, but I would just felt like we evolved to cry, okay? We evolved to cry. Why? For two reasons. One, now sometimes they'll say it's to release neurochemicals. I find that to be ridiculous. It's clear that we evolved crying to signal to other people in the same way that we evolved laughing to signal to other people. We evolved to laugh, not because we're trying to get some neurochemical out of our lungs. We evolved to laugh to signal to other people that we enjoyed what they are doing. We are social creatures. We're constantly looking to each other. And I mean, that's why you watch my reaction videos. That's why you comment. That's why I mean, we are doing this. We're constantly looking at each other and going like, what are you doing? Well, here's what I'm doing. What are you doing? Or do you know what I'm doing? And we're just in a constant state because, you see dogs at the dog park. There's, what are you doing? What are you doing? Let's sniff each other's butts. It's just like, that's all we're doing online. We're just sniffing each other's butts. But anyway, so when you laugh, you're signaling, I like that. And then it encourages the other person to do it more. Particularly when, you're young, the baby, the toddler will laugh and you're like, oh my God, I love toddlers laughing. And all you do is want to do more of that. And it's a mutual system process. Same with crying. When someone hurts your feelings and you start to cry, you feel bad. It's like, oh, I made someone cry. I did something wrong. Or you are seeing someone crying across the field and you're like, oh, that person is in distress. I need to go to them and help them. That's why we cry. We cry to signal to other people so they can give them a chance to help us. But if we're all sorts of busted up about crying and about vulnerability and about shame and trauma, then it all gets thrown off. In a perfect world or in a natural world, you, Abigail, would be able to cry whenever you wanted to, and people would be like, oh, how you doing? And you'd be like, yeah. So here's some advice. Abigail and some of the others were commenting. When you start to cry, just say, and you probably do this, but be confident in this. To tell people, look, I'm a crier, and so don't take offense to it. Don't worry. Don't feel like you have to. I'm crying right now. I'm having an emotion. You don't want to deny. You don't want to be like, I don't know why I'm crying. Just be like, I'm crying. I'm having an emotion, and I watch this YouTube channel, and he says that it's important to be okay with your emotions, but I don't want you to feel like you have to do anything about it. I'm just crying. Because a lot of people's anxiety is like, oh crap, what do I say? What do I do? And as a professional listener to people crying, I'm telling you, you don't have to do anything really. Just let someone cry. Or say anything. Say what you feel like saying, but don't feel like you're going to mess things up. A lot of times when people are crying around me, I just point it out. I'm just like, oh, you're really sad about that. Or, oh, I see that you're crying about that. That's all you need, just some acknowledgement that what's happening. Now, if it's something that is more complicated, then of course there's other options. But anyway, the point is just cry and say, I'm crying. And you don't have to do anything about it. And then if people start to get after you like, hey, just be like, hey, it's okay. I'm feeling sadness, and you don't have to fix it, and it might not even be your fault. It's just, I feel sadness sometimes. We all feel sadness sometimes, and I express it through my tear ducts. So, and if you're around people that are crying, please, for the love of God, don't shame them for crying. Jeez. Sarah says, I speak some Russian, and I think Natalie said, you forgive me, that when Natalie said, you forgive me, it was translated. It's a translation issue. The Russian phrase of you forgive me literally translates to forgive me and is often used where English speakers would say sorry. Interesting. So I'm always looking for that kind of information. So Sarah is saying that when Natalie says you forgive me, what she's saying is actually I apologize, essentially. That's interesting. Looking says, I had a therapist who told me that if I weren't crying during therapy sessions, she wouldn't be doing her job, right? Melinda says, listening to Dr. Honda talk about crying is making me cry. He's so gentle. Yeah, I mean, I guess. I wouldn't call it gentle. I would call it rational. It's scientific. The notion that we should shame anyone, including ourselves, for having one of the most fundamental human reactions to things is boggling. So I guess it's gentle. I consider it to be rational and logical. A lot of people say, oh, you got logic and you got emotions. No, it's logical to be emotional. We are emotional animals. We evolved emotions for a reason. We need our emotions. They are helpful to us. Natalie says, my whole life I have been a frequent crier. And I can say, as someone who has cried in front of a lot of different people in a lot of different situations, people are often very distressed and put off by the sight of me crying. I wouldn't feel so much shame when I cry in front of most people if they didn't vocalize the stigma that's attached to it, that I'm not strong enough, I'm not mature enough, I'm too sensitive, I'm manipulative, I can't handle myself, etc. In relationships, I was told, I can't tell you things because then you're going to cry, which is infuriating that my crying made him upset and then impeded his ability to be honest with me. At work, I've been awkwardly handled as I was escorted out to take a break. I've wished my whole life that I didn't cry so easily because it's really taken a toll on how I interact with people outside my very close circle. I wish more people had your perspective on others crying, but it's really not the case. Yeah, and I get it. And I guess I just live in a world where crying is the norm. At my university, obviously, I encourage students to cry. I cry. I'll never forget. This was a few years ago. I'm teaching this very boring class. It's basically like an introductory advisory class that I was program director. I was chair of the program back then. And I'm talking to all these new students. I don't know, there's like 30 of them or something. And I'm just kind of rambling about various different things that first quarter students should think about. And then all of a sudden, I turned a corner and I was talking about something that was kind of vulnerable to me. Maybe I was talking about I remember when I was a student and how difficult it was, and I just burst out in tears. I mean, in the middle of, students I didn't even know. And I was like, oh, I'm crying right now. And I had a split second of dude, what are you doing? You need to be teaching this class. Everyone is watching you. Don't cry. But then I said, all these people are going to be crying at some point in the program. I need to model to them that it's okay to cry, particularly for a man to cry, particularly for a professor to cry. And so I'm just gonna say, you know what? That's touching on something, and I'm crying right now. And I want to actually do it more on these videos. Occasionally it happens, and I go with it because of that reason. I want to walk the walk. There's nothing wrong with me crying. What's the big deal? Just like I just laughed right there. What's wrong with laughing? What's wrong with getting angry about the fact that we are being shamed for crying? Nothing's wrong with my anger. Nothing's wrong with me doing this and wanting to punch out the shame and the ridiculousness. There's nothing wrong with me laughing when something's funny. There's nothing wrong with me crying. It's a fundamental human thing. Anyway, but yeah, it's particularly tough, I'm guessing, for women because they're going to be looked at as manipulative or too sensitive or something. And when men cry, it's seen as oh, that must be serious. But of course, men have it worse off in other ways because they are definitely taught they cannot cry from an early age in general. What I say is everyone is taught they can't cry. Men are particularly taught they can't cry. So yeah, I'm sorry, Natalie, that you're going through that. And let's all try to change society. Mike and Natalie, number 9, sister says, I wonder if Mike just doesn't understand how difficult getting a visa to the U.S. is. I'm in an international marriage and find that most Americans assume our immigration system is fine and dandy and don't realize how convoluted and long and expensive and sometimes cruel the process is. End of comment. Yeah, I could absolutely see that. I certainly don't know what it's like. I know a little bit. I had some extended family who were dealing with this and would hear about the stories, but certainly I don't have a visceral understanding. Although I do have some friends that were going through this, and yeah, it was very convoluted and could be very cruel and very long and confusing and anxiety-provoking and upsetting. It very much can be. Sarah says, the other thing to consider with regard to Natalie's feelings about people not sharing the same views is that she has lived through a lot of political and civil unrest. Natalie was 5 or 6 years old when the Soviet Union collapsed, and since then, there have been several revolutions and attempted coups. So having different political or philosophical opinions may feel very destabilizing to her. End of comment. I love comments like this because I did not think of that, but of course that could be a factor. That could be a major factor, particularly that us Americans wouldn't be able to resonate with. That, yes, the Soviet Union has been through a lot of unrest. And for people that grew up during that time, there could be a lot of traumas as a result of that. In the same way that when we see people in the United States being prejudiced against Muslims, we'll see that. Like with Rebecca's daughter's fiance, the guy seemed to be racist against Muslims. We don't know, but there was some indication of that. And it's easy to look at that and just be like, racist. But 9/11 was rough. And it was a very difficult thing. Now, you could easily argue that wasn't a Muslim thing. It was some other kind of a thing. It was a Osama bin Laden thing. It was a Saudi thing. Anyway, there's a whole debate you could get into. But at least it was sold to the American people as a Muslim thing, which was unfortunate. But anyway, that was a very scary time. 9/11, I lived through it. It was a very, very scary time. Very, very traumatic for a lot of people, including me. And if you grow up in the Soviet Union, where you're seeing much, much more strife than that, and you associate political or any kind of difference with a lot of unsafety, and then you experience difference with your spouse, I could see that compounding or exaggerating the feeling of threat that you would get when your spouse doesn't share your point of view. For sure, I could absolutely see that. Habeas says, it just occurred to me that improv classes would be a great tool for couples to learn to communicate better. I'm sure I'm not the first person to point this out, and I will bet that there are improv teachers who are psychologists. Improv performers learn to carefully observe and call out the emotions that scene partners communicate verbally and non-verbally. We use a lot of I feel and you seem statements. End of comment. Yeah, Habeas, it's true, and you're a very intuitive person. That there are improv people who teach improv classes and are also clinicians, and they will point that out. In fact, I have an episode on improv therapy that came out, 5 or 6 years ago. You can find it on YouTube. Just Google improv therapy, I think. I think it's on YouTube. Anyway, you can go to our website as well. Point is that you're right, that when you teach improv, you teach people to really pay attention to what the other person is saying, and don't convolute it with your own expectations or your own agenda, and really listen and don't push aside everything else that's in your mind and laser focus on the other person and bounce off of what they are feeling and what they're doing. And it is true that when you teach some skills in improv to couples, they actually communicate a lot better, and there's a lot more attachment security because of that. So yeah, it's an emerging area that is slowly emerging, but it is a important area. And so it's not just teaching improv, it's actually, there's a lot of different, so improv teachers, they have a lot of exercises that teach improv basics. Because a lot of people come into improv with all that agenda and all that in their head thinking instead of really noticing what's happening. And so they have all these exercises where you will throw a ball to someone, and then you say a word, and then that person has to follow with their word, and you have to build like a sentence together as you're throwing this ball. And there's this physical visual representation of, I'm throwing this to you, and now you throw it back to me, and then I throw it back to you. And you have to follow their word. When you're saying a sentence, when you're building a mutual sentence, you have to follow syntax-wise what they said, or maybe theme. You have to follow at least a little bit what they said. And that begins to develop this habitual neurological situation where it might translate into emotional talk with your spouse in terms of really paying attention to what they're saying instead of thinking all these other things while you're quote-unquote listening. Who Knows says, I love watching these videos before I go to work. I work in customer service, so the whole day I'm dealing with a lot of BS. Now I use Dr. Kirk's knowledge and apply it to deal with difficult customers. I don't take it personal anymore. Now I just feel bad for those customers because who knows what traumas they have. Yeah, at my best, I'm the same way. When I am at my best, I have this perspective as well, that when I am dealing with people who are being difficult in public or in private life, I'm thinking, okay, what traumas are going on here for this person? The more and more I live, the more and more I interact with people, the more and more I realize that we are all walking around with a lot of traumas. We are all walking around with difficulties, in need of a lot of therapy, by the way. Laura Celeste from DC actually emailed me. So you can actually email me, and if it relates to the reaction videos, whether it's 90 Day Fiance or something else, Stacy will put it in this list, and I might read it in one of these things. So you can go to the website, click on the Contact Us page, and email me directly there. But Laura Celeste from DC says, as far as Eastern European couples are concerned, I think you might want to consider the culture of Eastern Europe. So this person is responding to my call for like, hey, does anyone know anything about these different cultures that we're talking about here? Because I want some more background. So Eastern European culture is similar to American culture in the 1950s. If you are not married, especially a woman, and you don't have kids, especially if you're a woman, you are considered an old maid. In fact, I was even brainwashed into thinking I had missed the boat on marriage and kids because I was 26 at the time when I was there. People you hardly know discussing kids and marriage with you is the norm. People, mainly women, do this to show that they care about you and the happiness in your life, which is linked to marriage and kids. Also, almost all the Eastern European couples complain about their dirty house or apartment. Eastern European houses are clean, clean, clean. It is considered shameful to have a dirty house, even if it is a coat that is over a couch or something. End of email. That's interesting. I didn't know that. So that helps. When we watch Natalie, for example, and maybe other people, we can look through that lens of a culture that values things to be very neat and very clean, and a culture that values marriage, particularly if you're a woman, particularly if you're older, and that you need to have kids in order to be a valued human being. And certainly this is in American society as well, but we have seen that decline in intensity over time. We still have it. We still have a pretty good dose of that, but it's far less prevalent and the norm than it was in the 50s. And what Laura Celeste is saying is that in Eastern Europe, they're like that now. So Eastern European, very clean houses. Even if you just have a coat over the back of a couch, that's considered disgusting, at least to Laura Celeste, and that you need to have kids and need to be married. All right. Well, that was a long one, I think. I don't know how long I was talking, but it felt like a long time. A lot of comments to react to, a lot of provoked anger and thoughts from the old noggin on this one. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.